This is the Cycling Over 60 podcast, episode 11, None of Our Bikes Fit, and I'm your host, Tom Butler. I am here with another update on my quest to the Seattle to Portland bike ride, put on by the Cascade Bicycle Club, and in a bigger way, this is my journey to get back into shape and set myself up for a more vital life as I get older. It is now 44 days until the STP. I've logged around 1,309 miles of training, and I have some pieces of really excellent news. First, I did a 60-mile ride last week and had no knee pain. In case you are new to the podcast, I developed a pretty bad knee pain at about 50 miles on the other rides that I've gone further than 50 miles on. One was a 60-mile ride and one was a 100-mile ride. It was determined to most likely be bursitis, so I have been actively working on mediating the risk of developing it again. I will talk more about this later in the episode. Of course, I need to test this some more with long rides, but I am cautiously optimistic that I have found a way to prevent the pain. On my 60-mile ride, I was employing my new method of pedaling. I slowed down to 85 to 90 RPMs and shifted up so I was pushing a higher gear. And that worked awesome on this ride. I was able to keep a 14 mile per hour average for the 60 miles. That's much, much better than I have ever done, and my heart rate was in a very healthy range. The problem was that I absolutely shredded my legs. There would have been no way for me to keep that pace up for 100 miles a day for 2 days straight, which is what I need to do for the STP. However, and this is amazing, the next day my legs felt relatively good. I wasn't really that sore. So I believe it is going to work great for me to push much harder on more rides. Finally, my new favorite ride is one where I climb up what is a steep grade for me. The route is 22 miles and includes climbing the hill twice. By pushing myself a little harder now, I was able to climb the hill without stopping for the first time this week. Every other time I've had to step off the bike at least once, usually a couple times. For me, the biggest deal with this is that I simply can push harder than I thought, and by doing so, I am building leg muscle. Even at 60 years old, I can see significant improvement in my leg strength in a relatively short time. That's the update for this week, and I am feeling pretty excited at this point. This episode is a little long, so I'm not going to say much about the interviews except that 3 of us that are riding the STP together all had bike fittings and found that none of our bikes fit. Here are the discussions about our experience. Just an admission, because of my mess up, we couldn't use our good mobile mics, so the audio of the actual bike fitting session isn't very good. Sorry about that, but here we go. I am joined now by my friend, Jesse Ferguson.
Hello.
How are you, Jesse?
I'm healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Nice. Jesse, as you might know, is joining me on the STP. And also, Jesse did a bike fitting with me. Both went to the same place to have a bike fitting done. I'm really happy, Jesse, that you did this with me. Kind of wondering, when I first started talking about doing a bike fitting, what were you thinking?
Well, there are people in my family that have had these, and I had 2 friends, happen to both be named Caleb, who are avid cyclists, and they have mentioned bike fitting. It's just kind of, it was like this legendary thing that some people do, and I never really thought it would ever be part of my life. It seemed too high class for me, but I really always kind of craved that attention of having somebody look and measure and check things and make sure it's going to work really well. I didn't know I was kind of feeling left out, and when I went and actually had the bike put up on the little stand and started pedaling, I just had this feeling of like, I'm being taken care of right now. These people care about my body and want me to be successful, So yeah, I was glad to be there.
I think we started looking at you doing a bike fitting. You started looking at bikes that you were going to use for the STP.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't own a bike, so you were kind of borrowing bikes.
Well, I did own a bike, but on the first bike ride that I ever took on that bike after my knee surgery, you were like, that bike doesn't fit you. One of the indicators was that when I turned, my foot would get knocked off of the pedal by the front wheel. So
yeah, it's funny. I discounted that bike so totally because that was not going to work. You went through some bikes, and so then you have the bike that now that you own. I think that there was some initial desire to see if any of those bikes were going to fit you, or see if we could actually fit you to the bikes that you had before. I didn't feel like that was going to be an issue with the bike you have now.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was also issues, of course, with your surgery and making sure that you weren't going to be ill-fitted to the bike and create some pressure on the knee that you had surgery on.
Yeah. And in the past, we talked a little bit about my non-surgical knee and that it was acting up. So I thought that maybe the fit of the bike would have something to do with that, because I did think that maybe my knees were coming up a little too high. And when I'm trying to create that circular pedaling motion with your feet, attached to the pedals, it seemed like it was in the upmost part of the stroke that I was starting to feel that twinge at first, then later pain and stiffness and stuff.
And then I developed an issue with my knee at like 50 miles on a couple different rides. One, when I did 100 miles, it was very painful. I actually wasn't planning on doing a bike fitting. I was just planning on having you do a bike fitting. And then when that came about, I thought, well, shoot, I'll get a bike fitting too. So we both went. And this is how the bike fitting starts out.
I'm gonna get you on comfortable, let you spin for a minute.
Okay.
Look at where do you position, how do you like to load, where do you like to sit at, what do your knees do as you ride, all those kind of dynamics to start to get a ballpark or a gauge on what we need to do for you. Yeah. We'll start making some tweaks. So then just like before, what we'll start at the cleat interface. How does your cleat load onto the pedal? What position does that put your foot in? Work our way back up to the seat position, front back positions, heights, angulations, and then work our way up to the handlebars. So go ahead and hop on. So set yourself into a gear that you're comfortable with.
So that was some information and also kind of overview of what the bike fitting was like. What did you think is when it got started?
Well, it made sense what he did, which was to have you spin for a little while first in a comfortable gear. Because when you first hop onto a bike, your feet aren't necessarily going to be in the position in the shoes that they settle into after a mile. And same thing with where your backside is in the saddle, and the balls of your hands or the heels of your hands rest on the handlebars and stuff. And just spinning for a little bit, it was like, yeah, now I'm in the position that I'm actually going to be riding a bike in. And I see why you put the bike up on the stand so that we could actually pedal a little ways, as opposed to just holding the bike with his front knees while you sit on it or something like that.
Yeah, and it was very important for him to have the bike set up in a position where he could step back and observe. And I think that having us on the indoor trainer and spinning, that's really the only way to do that. And
you're right, he did observe. He stood back maybe 15 feet, looked at it from the front and the side, and just kind of looked at your body position as you sat there pedaling, and made sure that your back wasn't too arched or that your knees weren't obviously coming too high or something like that. And he seemed pretty satisfied with both of our postures, I think.
And the he there is Chad McCann. I'll give him a moment here to talk about, from his perspective, what the purpose is of the bike fitting.
My name's Chad McCann. We're doing a bike fit. Looking at the whole purpose of a bike fit, in my opinion, is to help get somebody a little bit better angled and position on, so they become a little bit better friends with their bike. Right? The challenge we have with these is that bikes themselves are just super precision, machine-tuned, symmetrical objects that we put our slightly asymmetrical body on top of all the time and then ride for hours. So just like sitting in a desk chair, the longer you sit in one position, the worse it feels. That's the whole point, is to get somebody in a position that's as efficient as possible, looking at power production, looking at angulations of joints and how they come in to produce force, and then as comfortable as possible. It's finding a way to kind of merge those two. So there's in doing this, there's a couple things we look at, right? There are general kind of ballpark norms. I guess we should say that we use as a starting point, right? No, there's not one person that has to be at a certain angulation or a certain position. But that gives us a nice ballpark based on average bike geometries and how people generally set up, where people become more comfortable at is a good starting point. So we'll start get some of that and then tweak in and out of that as we see makes the most sense. So a lot of times too, as we do this, we're looking at what is the person complaining of, right? Where are the issues at? If it's a foot and ankle, knee issue, we know it's about seat height and position. If we know it's an upper back issue, it's almost always about handlebar alignment and how that loads.
They don't teach this in PT school, I'm thinking.
They don't teach us in PT school. UPS, they do what they call brown bag lectures over there, where they have people come in from the community and kind of do an intro to, so that students over there, because of our work with them, they know about it.
Cool.
Whether they get enough in that moment to really feel like they're comfortable with it is probably not, right?
Yeah.
How much can you do in 45 minutes while people are eating lunch? Like, okay, let me tell you through. But no, this is something, skill you pick up along the way. There's up in Seattle area, or Redmond area, I guess, there's a guy who teaches it for the PT level.
I'm thinking you're a cyclist. Is that right?
I am.
There are some things that Chad left out in his self-introduction that I think are important. One is he is a doctor of physical therapy. He practices at 3-dimensional PT in Tacoma, Washington. But in addition to that, he mentions UPS, which is University of Puget Sound.
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah. And he works with the physical therapy program there, including the doctorate program there, where he's a frequent guest lecturer. He also has a special interest in foot and ankle injuries related to sports performance. So after I heard this explanation that he gives about the purpose of a bike fit, I feel like if I'd heard that before, I would have probably done it sooner.
I like the idea of being friends with your bike. You have been adjusted to each other. Like, you've put on some muscle because you've ridden a while. Your neck's stronger. Your elbows are stronger to hold you in that position. Your backside is acclimated to a hard saddle. But the bike needs to make a significant change because, it's the thing that's actually mechanically adjustable. So for it to be customized to your shape, your stature, your goals, your capabilities, your injuries, all that kind of stuff, seeing you talking to him while you're sitting there or pedaling or having the little instruments applied to the frame of the bike, I realized how important it is, specifically with a long distance.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to be fighting your bike the whole way. You want it to be a partnership between you and the bike for sure. Yep. Not be fighting and arguing the whole time.
The bike can't go anywhere without you. And you're certainly not going to go as far without the bike. You could walk, I guess, but
there is this element of the precision of the bike compared to how imprecise our bodies are. And even from left to right, here we have kind of the purpose of the bike fit, and continue on with what he was doing specifically with me.
So what I see with you is you tend to ride, and this is just position, this is bike camera. You're pretty upright.
Yeah.
Right? You like to be vertical. In some ways, that's good. We target that to protect low back, but that changes force production a little bit. It's going to take your glutes and hamstrings out of the equation a little bit. So we want to make sure that as we reposition you, we can tweak some of that back in.
Okay.
So you're not just riding 100% all quad dominant, burning out. We want to get a well-rounded muscle support system in there so that you're using things as efficiently as you can. So
okay.
But we can see we're looking straight on here. You can see just knee angulation. I look here to go. Are his knees jumping in, jumping out a bunch? No, I'd say no. He has a little bit of a tendency to toe out, which can be fine based on how he's built. From the backside, I'm not seeing a lot of lumbar motion. It's not like he's dropping to one side to reach down to a pedal or anything like that. That looks pretty good. So now, as we're concerned about seat height and those kind of things, it's really going to be much more about where does his knee line up in relation to the pedal and the pedal axis as he produces force. I want to make sure he's pushing straight down and can create the biggest load because that makes him way more efficient. The first thing we're going to assess is where does your first MTP or the ball of your foot, where does that come down in relation to the pedal? Okay. Is that symmetrical both sides? A lot of times this is what we find as the first error is people have one that's in a great spot and the other one's not even remotely symmetrical. Like, well, your feet are going to load differently. So ideally, I found this to be consistent over the years. If you were a sprinter, all you cared about was speed and you're just running races, we'd put your first MTP just dead even with that spindle because that's maximum force production. The challenge in doing that is it makes your calf work a heck of a lot harder.
Okay.
Right? So if all we cared about was speed and we didn't care about how you felt, we'd do that because it's power production. For you going longer distance, where we're not going to worry about maxing out, then we're going to let that foot sneak a little bit forward because it takes some load off your calf and it'll make you a little bit more efficient in how you use the musculature. You're right up on the front edge of it right now, so I'm going to sneak that cleat back a little bit for you first. Go ahead and pop off, and we'll know where the left one needs to get to, and that's how we'll set the right one as well. So pop all the way off. So what we're going to do, so what we found was that his first MTP was basically right over the spindle. We want to draw that forward, so I'm going to do that by moving the cleat back. If I draw the cleat back a little bit, that's going to let his foot slide anterior or forward on that. And the hard part here is, the first one's easy because we're going to go, it's about right there. That feels good. The hard part now is getting the other shoe to match it and really know that you got them symmetrical, because it's all, you're just using your eyeballs.
What is an MTP?
It's the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So the MTP is basically what most people say is called the ball of their foot. It's the joint at the big toe. That's where you bear the most weight on your bike at. That's where you push the hardest as you're cycling. You can tell now they're asymmetrical, which they should be because we moved one and not the other. So now we're going to back this one out, and we're just going to try to guesstimate as best we can. Almost all bike shoes at some level have markings on the bottom. You can utilize those to an extent. They're not always perfectly symmetrical, but we can get a gauge here, right? So we can look here and go, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about the 6th line is where this is going to want to go. So there's the sixth line in the other shoe. And then we're basically oriented. So this is coming up. You see these 3 lines, 1, 2, 3. That's an angulation perspective. We're just outside the middle line. So we're just going to go just outside the middle line that way. And then we look at the side-to-side motion, side-to-side position, and go, I have basically an Allen keys or Allen wrenches width there. Do the same thing there. Tighten those back down. Depending on what your cleat is made out of will dictate how much force you can produce in that. To tighten those down, you get a carbon fiber insert or carbon fiber footbed, and you got to be careful because you don't want to crack a carbon fiber. Yeah, and there are good 4, 5, 6 different kinds of cleat interfaces. All of them have different degrees of what we call float, right? Which is how much you can angle in or angle out from that. Right. Some of them are a lot. Some people like what they call it's called a speed play, where they've got a number of degrees of internal and external rotation involved. There are pedals that only allow you 3 or 4 degrees total. People feel more locked into those and go, that's great if you get your angulation right. If you get your angulation a little wrong, then you're stuck in that, right? It's a hard rhythm to break sometimes.
So I can feel that difference.
Yeah. And it shouldn't, it's funny, right? Because how far do we move it? 16th of an inch, 1/8 of an inch? You're like, but it does interface a little different.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll find this with everything. I'm going to make a tweak and you're going to go, wow, it's different. And in 2 rides, it's not, you're totally accommodated to it. You'll not even recognize that it's just a little bit of a neurological change. So come out, reassess, go, there's my MTP. And this is what I like to do with most people. I want to put my finger right down the middle of the joint and then go straight down, and I want just the back side of my finger to contact the spindle, or the pedal axis, and that's perfect, right? And the idea is to go straight down, not obviously at an angle, but I can get there and go just enough room to sneak that forward.
It was really wild that he was making really small changes to my cleat position, and yet with the measurements he was doing, you could see, the difference that those very small changes would make. And he worked very hard at making sure that the cleat was matched from the left shoe to the right shoe, because those cleat position, makes a difference, very small differences between shoes. You could feel that. And I could feel the difference in, where he moved my foot from the little movement that he made in the cleat.
That's very interesting. It seems strange to me that such small changes in the position of your foot could make a big difference. But when he talked about if you're like a sprinter or, like a real athlete, maybe you could take the position of the pedal closer to the front of your foot, but going a long distance, it's going to wear you out. I definitely felt that when I changed from not being clipped to my pedal to being clipped to my pedal. My foot was in a much better position. Suddenly my calves were doing more work, but I also had a lot more power and more of my leg was involved. Before I just kind of would ride with my pedal in the middle of my foot, like in the arch of my foot. I realized how weak a position that was after I was able to make that adjustment. And so it makes sense to me that a fine adjustment to just the right spot would give you the right balance between power and endurance.
Several times what he's pointing out is, if you're a professional cyclist, you're just going to put up with being uncomfortable in order to be as fast as possible. When I think about, like the Tour de France, being uncomfortable day after day after day on long rides in order so that you can be on that machine in a way that translates to the most power.
When I was looking at cycling gloves, I found a pair that said shut up on the left hand and legs on the right hand, because it's like your legs are going to be complaining, like you were saying, especially at an elite level, they're going to be like burning, just screaming out for mercy from you. And you're just going to go, no, keep going.
Yeah.
It's like a motto of the cycling culture,
Yeah. And my version of cycling over 60 is not that. And I would never say you shouldn't over 60 be looking to perform at that elite level, but that's not my particular version of cycling over 60.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, is it okay? But I know you don't have to go fast. You just have to go.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So he moved my pedals, and that was the first step. And then he turned his attention to the angle between the top of my leg and the bottom of my leg in my pedal stroke. We'll listen to some of that.
So what I'm looking for then is angulation of patella. To produce most ideal force, I want your patella, as you come around to the sweet spot of your crank, which is about 90 degrees in the crank arm, I want the patella to live about an inch or so out in front of the axis of the pedal again. Okay. So go here and go, you're pretty close. We could sneak you back just a hair. Some of that's based on bike geometry too, and go like, where do you feel like you produce the most force? This is going to be super highly connected and correlated with, associated, I should say, go lift up, with the position that we put your seat height in, right? Because the angle of the seat tube is angled back. Right. So if I lift the seat up, it's going to come up and back a little bit. Right. So we compare that, we go down straight, put that crank straight to the bottom, grab your right brake so your pedal can't move, kick your right foot forward, that just locked you in there. Your heel's almost perfect. So now from this position, now we're going to assess your height. And we're looking for here somewhere between, when we talked about 15, 18, maybe 10 at the very, very most aggressive. You're like, I just need full sprint capacity, 18 degrees of angulation. As low or as much bend maybe as 20. Much over 20, you have the potential to get some knee joint irritation. You're on the low side there. You're pretty high right now. So as I get you in that position,
well, I need full sprint capacity.
I know
obviously.
You need it. Yeah. You're dialed in for it. You're living right there at like 9-10 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring your seat down just a touch. Go and hop off. I'm not going to bring it down very much. A little bit goes a long way here. And it's easy. This is just all guesstimation, right? We're going to go here and go, well, let's bring it down about this much and see what that looks like. So
one of the things that I'm concerned about is bursitis in my knee. Mm-hmm. Do you think a little bit overextension of my knee could contribute to that?
Sure. Okay. Sure, right? And we talked about that being, there's this kind of bursal reaction and some irritation there. The straighter your knee joint gets, certain tissues go on higher load. There's more compression in the joint system to get to that full extension. And then because of the way you fit onto a bike, it's not like you get into full hip extension while you're upright. You're leaned forward, right? So that puts more length and load through the IT band, through the hamstrings, inside and outside. So as we wind up those, every time we add a complexity to a system, we're taking away degrees of freedom of motion. Yeah. Right? Your joints, your systems, your soft tissues, they don't like living at end range. Yeah. So the more you force them into end range and put them on load there, they're more likely to react negatively. So if we bring them back off even a couple degrees off of end range, you go, oh, that's better. I'm not getting stretched out on every single stroke in the same way. So much of what we did with you last time was motion oriented, right? Like let's move and let's stretch out that tissue. Same concept. So if we put you on a bike here and you go, my hamstring's not very long, and then I get my knee into full extension and I lean forward, pretty soon every stroke you get right to the end of what you've got available. And then, pretty soon here comes some pain reaction. Yeah. So if we bring you just out of that, it should help some. Okay, hop back on there again. So I brought it down maybe 1/4 of an inch. Not a lot, but just enough to bring you out of that end point.
That's enough to get used to. Mm-hmm. To have to get used to.
Right. So we changed Jesse's bike. We went, 1 inch and 1/8? That's a lot. He's going to notice it for a while because that's such a different change. Right. Yours is 1/4 of an inch. You can go, oh, I noticed even 1/4 of an inch different. You go, yeah. So sometimes, I'll make the big inch jump if it's really necessary. Like, boy, we're so far out of whack, we want to really make this big accommodation. Just go get used to it. But we're careful with people, particularly long distance riders, that jump really changes things.
Yeah.
So we go, okay, I want you to move 1.25 inches overall, but I'm going to do it little 3/8 of an inch increments. Do that, ride with it for a while, get used to that, then go to the next one. And by the end of it, I want it to be all the way up here. So there's no way that changed, right? But this certainly changed, because as we brought your seat down, it also brought you forward some. Where's your angulation now as far as where your patella comes down? Now you're snuck forward a little bit. Now I can accommodate that because I brought your seat down. It also came forward, but I can accommodate that just by now sliding the seat back a little bit.
Right.
So I can kind of, there's this arc of motion that I have available to me, and I can mess with a couple different little pieces to find that sweet spot. Lift up here, push that straight down, that cranks straight to the bottom. Grab your right brake, kick your right foot forward just so it locks right there. Drop your heel down just a little bit. So now we were at about 10 degrees, and now we brought you down that 1/4 inch, brought you another 10 degrees. So you're right at 20.
Okay.
Which I'm going to say is okay for you.
Okay.
Right? That's a guesstimation. We probably don't want to come down anymore, but we could bring you up just a hair. We're probably splitting hairs in doing that, right? The difference, we dropped you down 1/4 inch, and you went from about 10 degrees to about 20 degrees. So if I bring you up 1/16 of an 1/8 of an inch higher than where you were, you're going to be more to the sweet spot. We recognize that there's error in this measurement too. Yeah. So we assume about a 3-degree error in just how we measure it. So we go on 20 degrees, you're real close. Yeah. Right. I'm not gonna worry about trying to finesse that anymore. But in doing that, I do want to slide your seat back a little bit now.
Okay.
So hop off again, and I always wait to this point to worry about seat angulation, because if I'm going to loosen the bolts up once, I'll just do it all at the same time. So I'm just going to loosen that up. Let it be. You're really close to your max already. I don't want to come back any farther than that, because the seat can become unstable. And then from a seat height position or angulation position, tilt, I want to get to the point where we kind of see where you sit at. This is just round off so he doesn't get impingement. So there's kind of the top point of his nose. We look at where the seat starts to swing up here and go, that's the point right about there that I want to be as level as possible. So we're not getting pushed up in the anterior side, but you don't feel like you're sliding forward off the seat either. I know there are people that will actually put a level on the seat.
Okay.
And you're like, this is the spot. And I go, I'm just not confident that I know exactly where that specific measurement point is supposed to be. And like, it could be here to there, and that could throw you off a couple degrees. So kind of guesstimate and then jump back on and go, what does that feel like? Right? There are fitters that will mess with this until, okay, I said 15 degrees. You were going to get to 15 on the dot. Like, that's fine. That's a way to do it. Super, super technical. But again, there's always going to be a little bit of variability, a little bit of a range in where comfort is. I don't think we need to be that explicitly exact. Okay, jump back on that again. Now we've got your front back orientation. We've brought your seat back as far as it can go safely.
Okay.
So now we just accept whatever amount of error we have in angulation positioning of the patella as you come through. So
Feels pretty good, actually.
isn't that funny too, where you go like, what do? We brought your seat back 1/16 of an inch, we brought it down 1/4 of an inch. We just we moved where your cleat was at, and it feels different.
Yeah.
Oh. So let's bring it back down here again, see if we were able to tweak out any of that. Lift up. Drop down, see if we were able to tweak out any of that front back patellar position concern. Drop that plumb bob off the patella again. It's pretty close. Right? I'd love to have you back just a little bit farther, but this is the accommodation. This is the compromise we're gonna have to make with your bike. Okay. Right? And it's not the end of the world, right? We can get wound up about being ultra specific and go, reality is this is what you're gonna get on a bike with this particular geometry. Right? The way to maybe put you in a different position if we were really concerned because this is continuing to cause knee pain, then we start talking about, well, we need to look at maybe a different bike that changes the angulations of how these pieces fit, because the way you interface on this particular one is going to force you into that angulation. We could change seat and get a little bit longer swath in where the seat sits. There are options to do. Right now your seat post is straight. Okay. There are seat posts that have what we call a setback on them, so that anchoring point of where the seat comes in to the seat post is back a little bit. Yeah. There are tweaks you can make. We're not trying to gain enough to make that necessary. We're trying to, if we're going to do it, we can gain enough to make it. Well, yeah, sure you can, but my guess is you're not going to notice that to be wildly different.
So there's three things that he adjusted with me. One was where my foot was contacting the pedal. Second thing was my seat height. And then the third thing was moving back my seat. He adjusted my seat height, as you heard, only a quarter of an inch. But those three things together, I could definitely feel a difference in.
And then the seat, it went down a quarter of an inch.
I'm sorry, it went down a quarter of an inch. That's right. Where my seat was, I felt very comfortable with it. When I used to bike a lot when I was younger, I felt like that was as aggressive as I would be pedaling. But here, that angle, my leg was extended too far. That angle was not enough to put my knee in a good position. I would have never guessed that.
And you're thinking that's going to help with that bursitis issue that you were having?
Well, as he was talking about, if you look at my back, I'm leaned forward. So that's creating more tightness between my back and my glutes and my hamstrings, all the way down. And then I straighten my leg out, and that then creates more tightness. With the theory being that the bursitis that I was experiencing was because things were too tight in there. Those adjustments would be significant for loosening it up. The truth of the matter is, I believe I experienced that. I went on a 60-mile ride a couple of days after the bike fit, and I was getting the bursitis at about 50 miles. And I didn't experience that this time when I got to the 60 miles. At 50 miles, I didn't feel it. When I got to 60 miles, I didn't feel it. Theoretically, you could say, okay, that relaxed things in there so that I wouldn't have the same pressure on my knee joint. And then what I seemed to experience was that theory playing out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would push against that for just a moment and suggest that it's hard to tell because you also have been doing the stretches that the same person recommended you do.
That's a very good point. But if the stretches were effective, then the tweaking of seat position forward and backward, the seat height, and my pedal position, all those things are along the same theory that those stretches are. So it probably is a combination of all those things.
Well, that feels good.
It feels great because it was really painful. So it feels really good not to have the pain.
He didn't adjust anything for your upper body except for the rotation of the handles, the pads for your bar, right?
Yeah, and he mentions at one point that I have a more upright position, and I got a bike that put me in that position purposely because my neck would get very sore on long rides, and which was one of the reasons why I stopped cycling. So I think that he felt comfortable because of my needs for me being in a very upright position. But I have bar ends, and he did change the bar ends pretty significantly to put my hands in a better position because he felt like they were kind of tweaked the way that I was holding the bar ends. He approached your position differently than he approached my position. He wanted you to be a little more aerodynamic than you were, not so upright. I can't remember what he adjusted on your bike in order to make that happen.
Well, he brought the seat up by 1 1/8 inches, and then he pushed the seat back a little ways, partially to make sure that my patellas weren't too far forward, the kneecaps, over my feet or whatever. But as he was doing this adjustment, sliding the seat back a little bit, he was also saying, and this is going to make you more aerodynamic. I was glad to hear that, but also a little concerned because I've had some numbness issues in my left foot that I think is from perineal pressure, perineum being that area right between your legs where, it never sees sunlight. But if you have too much pressure right there, I guess there's some nerves that run through there, and so it can make you kind of feel numb. In your legs or your feet. Because I've had that, I want to make sure that I'm doing what's necessary to prevent it. Unless it's fine, I wouldn't mind having numb feet as long as it's not going to damage me permanently, but I don't know that. So if I do experience numbness, a different bike fitter said apparently that I can lower my seat, but I'm worried that I've just had a bike fitting. Are these numbers sacred?
I definitely don't think they're sacred. In kind of the research that I did and things that I've heard, there seems to be quite a range. At the same time, I think there's a real consensus about, certain angles are too low, like 15 degrees or less is too low. and then 35 or above is too much of an angle. And obviously that's going to change a lot depending on what you're trying to do. But I think most bike fitters are kind of in that range of this is, optimal. But, there'll be bike fitters that are like, you want to be 30 to 35, and there's bike fitters that you want to be 15 to 20. And your seat, I think, ended up at about 20 degrees.
That's right.
I think you started out at about 40. Do you think
Yeah,
right?
something like that.
I think you definitely have some flexibility to lower the seat a little bit, but I think it would be a situation, of being careful not to lower it too far.
Well, I want to give it a shot. I mean, a professional bike fitter, doctor, cyclist, person said this should work for you. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's not like, have you ever been driving and then along the side of the road, there's some 17-year-old dude riding a little tiny bike and his knees are like firmly in his armpits while, it's nothing like, I don't have any issues anywhere that bad, but I was a little embarrassed when it was like, well, I'm going to move this a lot. It was like, oh, wow. I guess I should have thought about changing something when I got this bike, which I didn't.
I think that Garren also went and got a bike fit.
You mentioned it.
Yeah. So Garren Myler is also going to be riding with us. And I went with him on that bike fit, and it was quite different.
Different?
We got a bike fit by Doctor of Physical Therapy who does bike fittings. Garren got a bike fitting from someone who used to be a professional cyclist and has gotten into bike fitting as a way to stay within the cycling industry. From the machines that he had to the philosophy that he has, it was different. It was interesting to see that you could go to different bike fitters and have a different experience. I think that Chad is used to looking at bodies and kind of assessing them. And I think he did things more by visually looking at what was going on with their bodies. Whereas in Garren's bike fitting, there were a lot more devices that were used to assess things.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing that. But which bike fitting do you think was more expensive?
Garren's bike fitting was longer, and so that made it more expensive. But I think that it was pretty close to the same. So
if somebody is looking to get a bike fitting and they say, how much do you think this will cost? At what price point do you think people should say that's too much?
Well, I really felt like it was worth a lot to me. Cycling, for the rest of my life, I'm going to need to have a bike that fits me. I'm going to want to reduce the wear and tear of my body that would come from a bike that didn't fit me.
Mm-hmm.
For a bike that I was fighting with rather than cooperating with. And so I found it to be very valuable. So I think it's worth spending $100 to $200 at getting a bike fitting done. Knowing what I now know, having gone through it and also having heard Chad talk about it, I definitely would have gotten it earlier. I would have gotten it as soon as I bought my new bike. How about you?
If I ever get another bike, I think that's going to be kind of a standard thing for me, is to go and have the fitting done. Theoretically, you could have a friend come over and watch a few videos or read a book about it and kind of take care of it. I think you could get pretty close there, but you're not going to have a plumb bob with like the certain measurement from the frame of the bike to your knee and all this kind of stuff. You're not going to just have tools like you mentioned, Garren, they had some instruments or something. You're not going to have that on hand. And so it's going to be much more eyeballing and less precision. I just don't want to have somebody who's pretending to know what they're doing.
I think that's fair. I would say to anybody who's looking to have a bike fit done, do some reading. Any place that does a bike fitting, I think they do understand that they need to show that the person doing the fitting has expertise. I think the information to make a judgment about a person's expertise is out there. Well, I think the only thing left for us to do is actually now put some time on the bike. So we'll have to get out and do that as soon as possible.
Yeah. We'll see you on the road.
All right. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye now. I'm now joined by Garren Myler. Hey, Garren, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me. If you have listened to the podcast before, you know that Garren will be riding the STP with me. And Garren ended up getting a bike fitting a few days after Jesse and me. So it ended up that all three of us got bike fittings. So Garren, I'm wondering what caused you to decide to get a bike fitting?
So long story short, when I bought a new bike, the place that I bought it from offered a discounted bike fitting as part of the purchase of the new bike. So that was a good opportunity for me to do it. It hadn't really been on my radar, but I did learn, I guess, about bike fittings just a couple of weeks prior. I walked into another bike shop and they showed me a rig that they had for bike fitting. And so I was interested in it then, but it wasn't really something that I was thinking too much about. In the past, I guess if you told me a bike fitting, I would have said, what are you going to adjust the seat and maybe roll the bars a little bit or something. I didn't really think that there was as much adjustability in the bike as I now know that there is. It was an opportunity that I had when I bought the bike, and I certainly wasn't going to say no to it.
And you bought your bike at Gerk's in Issaquah.
Correct.
And they have a studio like right in the bike shop, which I think you might mention later why that was helpful. What did you think of the level of expertise of the bike fitter? Bike fitter's name is Russell Stevenson, and I'm wondering how you felt his knowledge and his expertise and everything came across.
I think his knowledge was excellent. I don't think that there was anything left to be desired. He certainly had a very good understanding of bikes, and he also had a very good understanding of the physical therapy aspects as related to bicycling. He knew not just about the mechanical nature of the bikes and how those systems are going to interact with your body, but he knew what's going on inside your body as well. And so that kind of two-pronged approach to it definitely came off very professional, very informative, and every question we asked, he had a good answer for. Really was happy with the quality.
I really was impressed, having come from a bike fitting a few days before with a doctor of physical therapy, which worked out well for me, I think, because of the issue I was having. I had gone to see Chad McCann about my knee issue. So I think it worked well for him to do the bike fitting. But if I got a new bike, I think I might go to Russell or Russ. I think he goes by Russ.
Yeah, he does.
To have him do it. I looked up some information. He has been a cyclist and lived in the Pacific Northwest. He began racing when he was 15 years old. So he has that professional racing background in road, cyclocross, and also cross-country mountain bike racing. And he has won numerous elite and master national titles, as well as the 2013 Master Cyclocross World Championship. When he was doing the adjustments, what are some of the adjustments that you think were the most significant for you?
So I think to me, there were kind of two major categories of adjustments that both felt very different. There was the lower body adjustments, the pedals and the seat, and then there was the upper body adjustments, which is primarily just the handlebars. Those two subsets were very different. With the lower body stuff, it was all very subtle, kind of nitty-gritty changes, those kind of things where he would say, oh yeah, I put a couple millimeters of spacers on your pedals. Does that feel better? And it's almost like when you're at the eye doctor and they're like, is A or B better? And you're like kind of splitting hairs. You're like, yeah, I guess it's better, And it's those kind of things, especially with the lower body, where if your knee is not twisting on your stroke or you're able to be more in line with your pedals, then those kind of changes are going to add up. As we're riding, 200 miles, my knees are going to thank me by the end of it. But just sitting there on that exercise bike, you don't really notice a big difference. He'll adjust something, you'll try it again, and it's like, yeah, that's marginally better given the short duration of my ride on this trainer. But those kind of things are going to save your knees over not just high mileage rides, but over years of riding a bike. Those are the kind of things that are really going to make a big difference. But then as soon as we got to the upper body, to the handlebar adjustments, that was just absolutely night and day. The big thing we did, we switched out the stem. I think we lost about a centimeter off of it. The specialized bikes apparently come with pretty long stems on them. I think even the longest, it might have been like 110 millimeters, I think it came with. And so I knew from the moment I got on that bike that I was a little stretched out. And I had no doubt about that, commuting to work, that I was stretched out. And I hadn't really paid much attention to it because I knew I was going in for this fitting. So I didn't want to mess with things beforehand. But shortening that stem made a big difference.
I think that's an interesting thing, is that I know that you felt like you needed to do some adjustment on that bike the moment that you bought it. If you hadn't gotten the discounted bike fitting, then you probably would have just kind of tweaked that yourself but you wouldn't have done that with the level of precision that he was doing. Is that a fair comment to make?
Yes, absolutely. And to give you a really specific example of that, I knew I was stretched out on the bars. What I didn't know was by how much or by how much I should try to be unstretching myself. So what I mean by that is I felt like I was reaching too far. It was putting strain on my back and my shoulders, and I could tell. But what Russ said was that the goal is to be somewhere around a 90-degree angle between your torso and your arms as they're in front of you. And so when you put your hands on the bar in your most comfortable riding position, you should be at about 90 degrees between your arms and your torso. I would not have known what that target was to shoot for. I could have definitely switched out the stem. I could have rolled the bars around and done all that kind of stuff. And I would have maybe felt it out, but it would have taken a lot of trial and error. And even then, I wouldn't have known what I was trying to achieve. And I wouldn't have known if maybe I'd gone too far and made the bike too comfortable at the expense of performance or at the expense of durability or longevity of my ride, etc. That to me was really nice to have those targets.
I found it interesting. I think he talked about form and function. Do you remember him saying that about form and function?
Yes.
I don't know if he used those exact words, but what he was saying is that the bikes come set up a little bit too aggressively for the most part, kind of across the board. And that's just the way that manufacturers do things. And so it sounded like almost everybody needs to have some adjustments to not be so bent over, to not be in such a, like you said, laid out position, but that American consumers, that when they're riding a bike to test drive it, this is me kind of reading through the lines a bit, but when Americans test drive bikes, there's a certain feel that they think they should have, but that is not the optimal position. And so Russ needed to move you into that optimal position.
Yeah, I mean, I bought a carbon bike, right? You're not going to buy a carbon bike as a beach cruiser. You're buying a carbon bike because you want a bike that's going to perform. And so you take it off the shelf and you sit on it and you're like, man, this is an aggressive bike. Yeah, you certainly want that feeling. I am still a little confused by some of the choices they would have made. The thing that was the biggest difference to me, the thing that he adjusted that was like the most like, oh, wow, that needed to change, was the brake hoods, the angle of the brake hoods relative to the rest of the bars. Apparently, when Specialized takes these out of the box, the brake hoods are almost pointing outwards. And it's really not a natural position for your hand to be in at all. So we rotated those. I mean, it must have been a good maybe 15 degrees inwards. Just immediately putting my hands on those, it was like, oh, wow, that is so much more natural. And I've noticed that riding it since, that like much less fatigue on my hands, no tingling or numbness on my fingers, anything like that. Just really took the pressure off. And that to me is confusing because if you're setting the bike up to be aggressive, I don't know that having those pointed outwards is in any way aggressive. It's just unnatural. And I'm not sure why they would come out of the box that way. So whatever the motivation is for setting the bike up the way it is, it certainly was not made for endurance rides coming out of the box. I think if you were going for a more of a sprint style ride, then it might be kind of close. But even then, yeah, adjustment is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and which is an interesting comment because it's an endurance bike.
Right.
It is a Specialized Roubaix, which is an endurance bike. So you would think that when they pulled it out, they would adjust that. And it's also, I think, goes back to what you said about being a bit surprised by just how many ways there are to adjust the fit of a bike. I would have had no idea. I'm sure experienced cyclists know that you can, just rotate those brake hoods, the brake levers on that axis. But I wouldn't have thought of adjusting that. And I wouldn't think a lot of people that are new to cycling would think of that adjustment. So I think that was really a good example of going to a bike fitter really knows the different ways a bike can be adjusted. That was a particularly significant change that I believe that you will feel the difference on the STP, riding for 2 days. Not that you'll be able to really compare, but I think that is a difference.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah, that'll make a huge difference over the course of a long ride like that.
There was another adjustment that I was very interested in. One of these things that I would have never thought of, to space the pedals out wider.
Yeah. So I have a bit wider hips than most men do. And so for me, my feet were kind of being pulled inwards by the clips, leaving my knees pointing outwards as I pedaled. Not dramatically so, but when you put a laser level on, which he actually had a laser level, you could very clearly see that my leg was not level above itself. And so that was kind of creating this undue torque on my knee. That's something that would compound very quickly over time as I'm pedaling, that my knee would be moving out of plane with my ankle. And that would have caused problems for sure. So I think it was only like maybe 2 or 3 millimeters of a spacer. And you can't put that much on. I don't think you can go more than 5 or 6 mils on these spacers without getting new pedals. But he spaced them all the way out. And then in addition to that, he took the clips inside my shoe and he moved the cleat all the way outwards, or all the way inwards, I guess, to maximize. So I'm pretty much as far out on the pedals as I can go without replacing the pedals themselves with a different version, but made a big difference. And I can already tell that. It's one of those things that's subtle and you really have to think about it. And you probably wouldn't notice it if you just hopped on a bike and rode it for a minute. But having those things be in play, and I think is maybe even over the course of years, going to be a huge benefit to me.
He mentioned something about, have you injured that leg or something like that? He was looking for something that would explain what he was viewing, and he asked about an injury. Do you remember what that was about?
Yeah, there was a very subtle asymmetry to my legs, and he's explained that's very normal, that everyone has some degree of asymmetry in their body, and it's likely that everyone has a leg that's a little longer, a little bigger, a little stronger maybe, or whatever. And so one of my knees was just cocked a little bit more outwards than the other one. And very subtle. And again, you had to put a laser on it. He had a little band he put around my knee that had a white dot on it, which kind of helped you track my knee relative to the laser when you're looking at it. And it was very, very subtle, but it was definitely noticeable. And so he asked me, he's like, "Have you injured that leg?" And it turns out, yeah, I have. I had broken a lot of bones in that leg in a motorcycle accident, had a couple of surgeries on it. And he was able to pick that up just from looking at the laser level on my leg. So maybe that's an ode to the level of expertise that he brought to the table. But that was pretty interesting to see. But yeah, there is a certain degree of asymmetry that you can, if you don't account for it, you can at least be aware of it when you're setting up your bike, that, hey, this leg is a little bit different than the other leg.
It'd be hard to think about having a bike fitting from someone that didn't have that level of expertise.
There is one thing I'd like to ask you about. So I know that you had said in your bike fitting that the target for your knee angle at the downstroke was 15 to 20 degrees, right? Is that what the advice you'd received?
Yes.
And so that was differing from what Russ was saying. I believe he was saying 30 to 35 was the range he was looking at. So that to me is a pretty big difference. I think he had me set up right around 30 by the end of it.
Do you remember where you started at?
I don't actually, but I don't think he didn't raise the seat much. He raised it a little bit, but it wasn't too much. And so I think it was about less than an inch. So the angle of my knee was probably, because he did raise the seat, it would have been a little bit higher of an angle, so it probably would have been in the upper 30s.
It was very interesting to me to hear Russ talk about 30 to 35, where Chad was talking about 15 to 20. I would think, as an ex-professional racer, that Russ would be more aggressive than Chad. I don't know Chad's full cycling history, but he did not talk about racing. But I do think that 15 is probably the low end of that, as I do some reading online, and then 35 would be the top end of that. And so I think professionals are going to have a little bit different take in between 15 and 35, but you're not going to find anybody that's recommending above 35. And I think what it means for you is that, you could, if you chose to, maybe lift your seat up and have it be a little more aggressive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that range, that's quite a range to play with. And I think that really gives a lot of wiggle room for personal comfort and personal preference. If you are someone who's more flexible, then maybe, one direction might work better than the other one. And I think that really just comes down to feeling it out.
I went on a climbing ride today. He moved me from like 9 degrees to 20 degrees. And I went out today on a ride that was a climbing ride. And I really felt it. Now, that's easily my imagination, but I just felt like I was really not extending my leg as far as I wanted to on that climb. But at the end of the day, I climbed that climb better than I'd ever climbed it. I set personal records on segments of that ride. So, I sure can't say that, oh, he ruined my bike position. From everything that I can see, then it was very successful for my fitting. How about you? How do you feel about, as you've ridden it, do you feel like it fits better? Do you feel like you definitely got your money's worth out of the fitting?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I feel like the bike fits me a lot better. And I think that I haven't gone on a lot of like high performance rides since then. It's mostly just been commuting. So I don't know what it's like when I'm really pushing it. But I can tell you that comfort wise, it's been a big step up. It's the pressure distribution is even. There's not as much pressure on my hands because I'm not in such an aggressive position because of the way that we were able to angle and adjust the seat. It's now distributed the seat pressure more evenly across the whole seat instead of just on, two like pressure points or two bones or anything. And so that's been much more comfortable in itself. Having the stance wider on those pedals, having my legs straight, it all makes a big difference when you add it all together. So that's been comfort-wise. It's been a huge improvement, and it just feels really good to have a bike that's tailor fit for me.
Awesome.
I guess the only other thought that I'd like to share is that as cool as the bike fitting was, there's really no magic box with this. There's no piece of equipment that he had that you wouldn't have at home to do this. I mean, he had the lasers, he had a little angle measurement thing for the leg, a little protractor for the leg. But overall, like nothing that he did was anything that you couldn't do yourself. And if you just Google what are the adjustment points on my bike, you could go out, you could change stuff around. And like I said earlier, you wouldn't have those target points. You wouldn't know exactly what you're shooting for in terms of what angles or whatnot, but you can certainly feel it out. And I think that from a standpoint of comfort, you could get your bike to be somewhere that's really, really comfortable pulling it off the shelf and adjusting it to fit you, and kind of just looking at yourself and saying, where are the pressure points? Where are the parts of my leg that aren't straight? And you could get your bike pretty close and pretty good right on your own. And so I just don't want anyone to feel intimidated if they can't afford, the hundreds of dollars it takes to fork out for one of these bike fittings. That's all to say that there's a lot of adjustability in a bike, and it's nothing you can't do with an Allen key. Change something, take it on the block, see how it feels. Spend a couple hours doing that, and I think you'll have a really good bike under you.
I think there's a couple things. One is you need to take the time to go out and research because, again, the bike is adjustable, I think, in more ways than most people would imagine it being. And there's different things that you can do if you know what you're doing. And so I would want to go out and accumulate that knowledge before I decide to do it myself. And then you'd have to set on some philosophical numbers, like what is that right angle or the angle that you see as being the correct place to be from your top leg and your bottom leg at the lowest point in the pedal motion. I would think that you would want to make sure that you had all that knowledge. I think that it's worth the money to not have to do that. So, that's my personal opinion. And I did think it was really handy, which was different than my bike fitting, to have the studio in the store.
Yeah, that was excellent. I mean, because right after the fitting, I had noticed a problem with my derailleur, and I walked it across the hallway and said, "Hey, my derailleur's been acting up a little bit since I bought it. Could you guys take a look at it?" And he took it back and he clicked some bolts and came back and said, "Yeah, you're all good." And the derailleur hasn't had any issues since. So certainly to have it right there in the shop. And not to mention he had, like I said earlier, we switched out the stem. So that was a matter of him grabbing that stem and then just grabbing a shorter one off the shelf and swapping them out. Didn't even charge me for that, just swapped them straight across. And so that was really good to have too, just to have those parts on hand. It's like, oh, you want to add a spacer here? He pulls open a drawer and there's like 10 spacers in there just for the exact make and model of bike that I have. That was very advantageous. And he was showing us things like alternative seats. He pulled out some different pedals, said, you could try these pedals, stuff like that. So to have it right there in the shop, that makes a big difference.
Everything put together, if you bought a new bike, do you think you would do another fitting again?
I absolutely think I would. Yeah. I think it's worth it at certainly at the price point that I bought my bike for. I think that it's worth it to have that thing fit to you. I'd love to try doing it myself almost as just an experiment. But I think at the end of the day, going in and getting it fit is the way to go. To make sure that if you're going to spend the money on a new bike, making sure that thing is going to work out well for you, and it's really an investment in your own health as well to make sure that your joints are not going to get worn out prematurely. You're not going to have any stress injuries. It's an investment for sure, and so in that case, I would definitely go ahead and get a bike fitting.
It's interesting for you to say that because I know that you're a bit of a tinkerer, and also you are the official engineer of the Cycling Over 60 podcast. And so, there's things about stress and force and friction and all of that I think you understand at a professional level. So I think it's really kind of a testament. And again, I think Russ is a really qualified bike fitter. So I think his years of experience, his experience as a professional cyclist, I think that's something that he brings to the table that is important.
I can imagine that it's not difficult to book a bike fitting somewhere and go in and have someone who doesn't really know as much as Russ did. So, I don't know what it's like to try to read the Yelp reviews on a on a bike fitter, but I could certainly see that being a difficult. I don't know how you'd vet them before going in, but we got very fortunate with the one there at Gerk's.
I guess the only thing that we're left to do now is get you out on your bike on a longer ride. We'll have to figure out how to get some time on your bike. As always, appreciate talking to you about bikes. It's really fun to have you around and kick around ideas. I'm really, really glad that you did a bike fitting and I got to set in on it. That was great to give more kind of a broader sense of what a bike fitting is like to do mine, and then a few days later to be able to sit on yours. So thanks for coming and sharing your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we will talk later and do some riding later for sure.
Sounds good.
See you later.
Yep, see you.
Bye now. The bike fitting was far more beneficial than I thought it would be. I think Jesse and Garren would both agree that in addition to getting our bikes fitted to us, we gained a bunch of knowledge about body mechanics and cycling. I would love to hear your thoughts about bike fittings, especially some opinions on the range of the leg flexion angle. Please check the show notes for the Cycling Over 60 Instagram and drop me a message. Or you can also find my email in the show notes as well. I wish you the best on all your cycling endeavors. And remember, age is just a gear change.